The emergency shelter on Veth Station's lower ring smelled like recycled air and institutional disinfectant, and Caleb Rourke had stopped noticing both 2 years ago. He came on Tuesdays and Fridays. That was the arrangement with the station welfare authority, and he kept it without fail. He was not required to. His official capacity as a Terran Transit Authority field liaison gave him clearance here, but nothing in his posted duties said he had to spend 6 hours per week crouching on low benches with displaced children who didn't share his language, his body temperature range, or his understanding of what a sandwich was. His supervisor, a compact Dravathi man named Osik, had looked at him the first time he'd filed the volunteer hours and said, without inflection, "You don't get paid for that." Caleb had said, "I know," and that had been the end of the conversation. The shelter housed a rotating population of 60 to 90 children, mostly separated from their families during the Corridor War's last refugee surges, or pulled off destroyed freighters by patrol vessels, or simply found. Veth Station sat at the junction of 4 transit lanes, which meant it caught everything the current pushed against its hull, including children who had no one and nowhere to go. Caleb was not a social worker. He was not a therapist, a medic, or a linguist. He was a mid-grade logistics coordinator who had started coming here because a Keth child named Aslan had wandered into the Transit Authority offices 18 months ago looking for anyone who knew where her family's ship had been rerouted, and he had been the only person in the building who hadn't immediately called security. He had sat down on the floor with her, pulled up the shipping manifests, and spent 3 hours finding her parents' registration in a holding pattern over Veth 7. She had cried when the connection went through. He had pretended very hard not to. After that, he'd asked the shelter coordinator, a tall, permanently exhausted Saurilan woman named Arith, if there was anything he could do on a regular basis. She had looked him over like she was reading a cargo manifest and said, "Come back Friday. Bring those crackers the Terran commissary sells. Don't promise them anything you can't deliver." He had come back Friday. He had kept coming. What he actually did there was hard to explain. He read to the children whose translators could parse his voice. He fixed things, a stuck locker hatch, a broken grav mat, once a heating unit that had been mistooned by 12 degrees for 3 weeks before anyone noticed. He played games he barely understood using rules the children explained to him in 3 languages simultaneously. He sat with the ones who didn't want to talk. He was very good at sitting. Arith had told him once that his real value was that he was large, calm, and boring. "You make the shelter feel like nothing dramatic is going to happen," she'd said. "That matters. They've had enough dramatic." He had taken that as a compliment. On the Friday that changed everything, Caleb arrived at the lower ring shelter at the usual time with 2 sleeves of Terran oat crackers and a Transit Authority satchel worn soft at the strap, and Arith met him at the access door with an expression he hadn't seen on her before. "We have a new one," she said. This was not unusual. New children arrived weekly. "How new?" he asked. "This morning. Patrol cutter brought her in around 400. Derelict life pod, no beacon, no registry. Pod was locked from inside." Arith glanced back through the door's small viewport. "She won't let any of us near her. She's been in the corner, behind the 3rd sleeping partition, for 7 hours. "What species?" "Verath." Arith said it the way you said something you didn't entirely have a category for yet. "We've had Verath children before. This one is different." "Different how?" "See for yourself. She won't bite, probably." A pause. "She hasn't bitten anyone yet." Caleb went in. The shelter's main room was a long, low space with pale walls and sleeping partitions down one side, and a communal table running down the other. Roughly 30 children occupied it at this hour, a cluster of Keth siblings at the table working through some kind of folding game, a pair of Asari children running a slow circuit of the room for reasons Caleb had never determined, 3 Dravathi girls who were almost always asleep, and a dozen others in various states of quiet occupation. None of them were paying attention to the corner behind the third sleeping partition, which meant they had already learned to give it space. Caleb walked that direction without hurrying. He didn't announce himself, didn't crouch or lower his voice preemptively. He had learned that the fast accommodation approach, where humans immediately made themselves smaller and quieter, often read as threat assessment behavior to children who'd been hunted. He just walked over and sat down on the floor with his back to the partition, which put him facing the room rather than facing her. He could see her in his peripheral vision. She was small, he'd have guessed 6 or 7 standard years, though Veth aged differently than humans and he wasn't confident in the estimate. She was crouched in the very corner where the partition met the wall, arms wrapped around her knees. Her skin was a deep muted blue-gray, the kind of color that would have read as bruised on a human body, but was simply the natural shade of a Veth child, smooth and even. Her hair was pale, almost silver-white, and had come half loose from whatever it had been bound into. Her eyes were large for her face, dark gold, and currently fixed on him with the specific quality of a child who had learned very well how to be still. Caleb opened his satchel, pulled out the crackers, and put a sleeve down on the floor beside him. He didn't offer them to her, he just put them down. He looked at the room. He watched the Keth siblings finish their folding game and start another. He watched the Asari children complete their circuit. He thought about a broken circulation valve on Deck 9 that he had to write up before end of shift, and whether the commissary would have the Terran spice mix he'd run out of. He sat like that for probably 20 minutes. He became aware at some point of the sound of small, careful movement. He didn't look. The crackers disappeared. He kept not looking. 3 minutes later, there was a presence to his left. The child, having crossed the floor in silence, was now sitting approximately 1 arm's length from him. Not quite beside him, not quite away from him. In the specific intermediate zone children sometimes established when they had decided the danger was low but weren't yet prepared to commit to safety. Caleb took a cracker from the second sleeve and ate it. He did not look at her. "CRRK," the child said. It was not a word he recognized, but the interrogative lilt at the end of it was plain enough. He held out the sleeve without turning his head. A small hand, 4 fingers, slightly longer than human proportion, tipped with the faint claw points Veth young had before they were trained back, reached in and took one. Silence for a while. "Terran," the child said. It was accented but clear, the word itself, as a question or an observation. "Yes," Caleb said. Silence again. "My name is Caleb," he said, because it seemed like information she might want. "I come here on Tuesdays and Fridays. I work in the Transit Authority office on the Upper Ring." She said something in Veth that his earpiece caught fragments of station, up work, and then switched back to a heavily accented but functional standard. "You find families." His chest did something complicated. "Sometimes," he said. "I help look." She was quiet for a long time after that. He let her be. She was in the same corner when he arrived the following Tuesday, but she was not crouched against the wall anymore. She was sitting cross-legged in front of it with what appeared to be a collection of small objects laid out in front of her in a deliberate arrangement. A folded piece of foil, a button from someone's jacket. He recognized it as Keth style, likely traded. 2 smooth stones from the decorative planter near the entrance that he was fairly certain weren't supposed to be there. And a flat square object made of some matte dark material that he couldn't identify at a glance. She looked up when he came in, which was progress. He sat down across from her collection at a polite distance and put the crackers between them. "Caleb," she said, by way of greeting. "Hello," he said. "I don't know your name." She looked at him. She looked at her objects. She arranged the button slightly differently. "Ren," she said. "My name is Ren." "Ren," he repeated carefully. "Is that your full name or part of it?" Something moved across her face, not quite pain, not quite caution. Part. He didn't push it. Ren, he noticed over the next hour, had already made several alliances in the shelter. The Keth siblings had clearly taken to her, and she had some kind of wordless arrangement with one of the Asari children who seemed to serve as a lookout in a game whose rules Caleb couldn't determine. She was not, despite the first impression she'd given Ruth, a child who isolated herself. She had simply been performing a careful assessment of which humans were worth trusting, and she had now apparently added him to the short list. He felt unreasonably honored by this. On his third visit, she showed him the flat, dark object from her collection. It was a memory tile, a recording device common across several species, used for storing still images. Veth made from the weight and finish of it. It was damaged. The activating surface had a deep crack running through it, and when she pressed her thumb against it, nothing happened. "It won't work," she told him. "Can I look?" he asked. She passed it over carefully, watching his hands. He turned it over, found the manual access port on the side. Most memory tiles had one as a failsafe, and pressed it. Nothing, which meant the short was in the activation pathway rather than the storage layer. The storage substrate itself might still be intact. "I might be able to get the images out of it," he said, "if I can connect it to a reader in my office. Not definitely, but maybe." He handed it back to her while he was talking. She took it with both hands. "The pictures are of my mother," she said. He had already understood this, but hearing her say it, the plain, careful way she said it, not reaching for pathos, just placing the information where it needed to be, made him sit up slightly straighter. "Okay," he said. "I'll be careful." She looked at him with those dark gold eyes. He had the sense that she was running some kind of assessment, the same one she'd been running on him since the first Tuesday, checking a column of observations against an internal standard. He did not know what the standard was. He did not know what she was looking for. He knew that he had, apparently, been passing the test repeatedly, because she was still talking to him and other adults had not fared as well. She thought about it for a long moment. Then she nodded and let him put the tile in his satchel. "If you can't get them out," she said, "tell me. Don't say you'll try again, tell me." "I'll tell you," he said. She nodded once. It was the nod of someone completing a transaction whose terms they had verified and accepted. Then she went back to her collection and began arranging the stones. He got the images out that afternoon. The technical part was straightforward enough. The storage substrate was intact, as he'd suspected, and the Transit Authority equipment lockers had an image recovery adapter he'd used twice before for damaged passenger documentation. He ran it, and the tile yielded 43 images. He was halfway through, verifying the recovery had worked when he stopped. He went back to the image on his screen and looked at it for a long time. The woman in the photograph was Veth, the same deep blue-gray skin, the same large dark eyes but adult, and the resemblance to Ren was precise in the way that made the relationship not a question. Same proportions of face, same quality of stillness in the posture, same slight tilt of the head. She was photographed in what looked like a corridor aboard a ship, and she was not posing. She was looking at something off-frame, and the expression on her face was the kind you only caught when someone didn't know they were being photographed, thoughtful, unguarded, fractionally sad. He had seen this woman before. It took him a moment to understand why he knew her. The Transit Authority processed hundreds of ships per week, and he handled the documentation routing for most of the incoming flagged manifests. She was not someone he'd met in person. She was someone who had come through the system. He went to his files. The search took him until the end of his shift, and then 2 hours past it. The Veth ship registry was a partial mess. The Corridor War had disrupted the central filing system for vessels that had been in contested space, and significant portions of the database were fragmented or missing. But Transit Authority offices at junction stations like Veth kept their own local copies of incoming manifests, and he had access to those. He found the reference on the 41st search variation. A Veth single-occupancy transport registered to a private holder had transited through Veth Station's inspection checkpoint 14 months ago, before the war's worst phase, before the refugee surge. The manifest had been flagged for a secondary hold because the vessel's documentation was partially in a format the automated system didn't recognize. It had been manually cleared, and the notes in the file were brief: operator cooperative, documentation verified, no contraband. Single occupant. The single occupant's identification record was attached. The name field was long, Veth names were compound and formal, and most of it meant nothing to him. But at the end, in the common use rendering the authority system generated for transit records, it read, Sorven Ale Myren. The family name suffix, Ren. He looked at the photograph in the identification record. It was not the same image from the memory tile. This was a formal documentation still, frontal and flatlit, but the woman was the same woman. There was no question. He went back to the tile images, 43 of them recovered. He scrolled through them slowly. Most were of Ren at different ages in different places, the visual record of a child growing up. Some were of places, a city he didn't recognize, a ship's interior, a landscape of pale stone under a sky he couldn't place. 5 or 6 were of the woman from a distance, or partially framed, or from behind. And then, near the end of the recovered set, there was one he almost missed because it was darker than the others, lower quality, taken in poor light aboard what looked like an escape craft. In it, Ren, 3 or 4 years younger than she was now, so younger than he'd ever known her, was pressed against her mother's side, and the woman had her arm around the child's shoulders and was looking directly into the recording surface, with an expression he understood immediately, because he had seen it on humans in identical circumstances. The look of someone who was making a record, because they did not know if there would be another chance. He sat with that image for a long time. Then he printed one of the clearer photographs, the candid ship corridor one, and folded it carefully and put it in the breast pocket of his jacket, and he finished his shift. He brought the tile back to Ren on Friday, with all 43 images restored and the tile repaired as well as he could manage. The primary surface was still cracked, but he'd bypassed it to a secondary activator that worked cleanly. When he handed it back to her, she held it in both hands for a moment before pressing the activator. The images appeared. She went through them slowly. He watched her face while she did. He had learned how to read Veth expression well enough to know that what he was seeing was not simple sadness. It was something more organized, more controlled. The face of a child who had decided how she was going to hold a very large thing, and was holding it the way she'd decided. When she reached the last images, she stopped for a long time. "Thank you," she said, in standard very precisely. "I also found something in the transit authority files," he said carefully. "About your mother, about where she was 14 months ago. I don't know where she is now, but I wanted you to know that I found a record of her." Ren looked at him. "She came through here," she said. It was not quite a question. "Yes." A long pause. "She was looking for me," Ren said. "She was going the other direction." She said this with the flatness of someone who had already worked this out. "She went to find me. I went to find her. The ship was destroyed." "Your ship?" "The one she sent me on." The child looked at her hands. "A merchant vessel. She said it was safer than the transport and she would meet me at the secondary contact point. But the merchant vessel was destroyed. She said it as fact, not as feeling. I was in the life pod. I locked it from inside because there were Karadan soldiers on the ship, and I'd heard my mother say to always lock the pod from inside if there were soldiers." Caleb kept his voice level. "That was smart." "She told me that." Ren folded the tile closed. "She tells me things like that." Present tense. He noted it, he didn't correct it. Over the following weeks, Ren became the fixed point of his visits in a way that none of the other children quite had, which he recognized as something he needed to be careful about. He had learned in his time here that the children who needed him most were not always the ones he should anchor to, because children who were here were children who were going to leave. That was the hope. That was the point. But Ren's situation was unusual, because the search for her family was genuinely ongoing and moving slowly, and she seemed to understand that she was going to be here for a while, and she had organized her corner accordingly. The collection of objects had expanded, and she had learned the names of every child and every adult who came through the shelter, and kept them sorted in her head with the systematic precision of someone who had been taught to always know who was around her and where. She asked him questions about his work. She asked him questions about Earth. She asked him once with a directness that caught him off guard whether he had a family. "Not here," he said. "My parents are on Earth. I have a sister. She has 2 children." "You are away from them," Ren observed. "Yes." "That is not good," she said, with the frank verdict of a child who had not yet learned that this was a thing adults didn't say to each other. "No," he agreed, "but it's temporary." She considered this. "Temporary is a word my mother uses," she said. "She says everything difficult is temporary. She says you only have to find the next step." She arranged the button in her collection to a slightly different position. "She says the next step is always findable." "She sounds like a smart woman," Caleb said. "She is," Ren said without any qualifier. He had continued the search in whatever spare time he could organize. He had put in a formal inquiry through the Transit Authority's Displaced Persons Coordination Office, which was overworked and had a 6-week response time that then typically yielded nothing useful. He had filed a cross-check request with the Veth Community Liaison on Veth Station, who had been helpful and pessimistic in equal measure. He had traced the manifest record forward from the 14-month mark, using the origin point of the ship's prior stops, which had given him a partial route and 3 more dead ends. What the search was teaching him, very slowly, was the shape of a woman trying to find her daughter across a war zone. The ship transit records showed a pattern that was legible once he knew what to look for. The vessel had not moved in straight lines. It had moved in the particular zigzag of someone traveling through contested space, changing routes at junction points, sometimes backtracking, always heading generally toward the secondary contact point Ren had mentioned. It was the travel pattern of someone who was being careful, who knew the routes were watched, who was prioritizing arrival over speed. At one point, he found a filing, a port of call registration at a small fuel station 3 lanes out, where the notation in the cargo field read *none, and the passenger field read *1* and the purpose of transit field, where most people wrote *commercial* or *personal, read simply, family. He had sat with that for a while. He had not told Ren all of this, because he did not want to promise her the finding before he had it. But he had also not stopped. And Ren, for her part, had not asked. This was something else he was learning about her. She had a very precise understanding of the difference between what she needed to know now and what she needed to wait for. She had inherited, he suspected, her mother's economy of attention. She directed it where it was useful and saved it when it wasn't, and she had apparently decided that asking him about the search every session was neither useful nor dignified, and so she didn't. She asked him other things instead. She asked him how the Transit Authority's manifest system actually worked, not the simplified version, the real version, with the routing logic and the cross-reference protocols. And he found himself explaining it in more detail than he had explained it to most adult colleagues, because she asked better questions. She asked him why some ships carried cargo classifications he didn't recognize, and he had to look those up. She asked him once, with the precision of someone who had been thinking about this for a while, what happened to life pods that weren't retrieved, whether they floated or whether someone eventually came for them. He told her that the rescue protocol for derelict life pods was actually fairly reliable, that pod beacons were hardened against most interference, and that the ones without beacons, like hers, were usually caught by proximity detection at junction stations within a few weeks of drift. Unless the current runs them through the keratin exclusion zone, she said. Yes, he admitted, unless that. She nodded like she was filing this information in the correct location. Mine was caught by Veth Station's perimeter scanner, she said. The patrol cutter retrieved it within 8 hours. I had food for 12 days. A pause. I was careful with the food. Were you scared? He asked, which was not a question he usually asked. Wren thought about it, really thought about it, the way she thought about things, not as a performance of consideration but as actual calculation. Yes, she said, but my mother told me what to do. I did what she told me. It helped. She folded her hands on the table. Fear is not the problem. Fear is information. She says that too. He thought about the manifest records and the zigzag routes and the purpose of transit field that just said family. She's right, he said. Wren nodded as if this settled something. I know, she said. It was raining on the lower ring the morning the thing happened, not real rain, but the humidity cycling that Veth Station did every 42 days when it flushed the atmospheric system, which produced a fine mist from the overhead vents and an ambient moisture that everyone in the lower ring hated. The shelter always smelled different on those days, heavier and warmer. Caleb had come in early. His morning meeting had canceled and he had time, and he found himself walking toward the shelter the way he sometimes did when he had unexpected hours, because it was where he went. The shelter was quiet at this hour. Veth was at the coordinator's desk running intake forms. Most of the children were still at morning rest or in the hygiene queue. The room had the particular calm of a place that had not yet had its day. Wren was awake. She was at the communal table with a borrowed writing surface, doing something he recognized as calculation. Veth mathematical notation looked like a hybrid of musical scoring and coordinate geometry, and she moved through it with the ease of a child who found this restful. He sat down across from her with his jacket half unzipped, the printed photograph still in the breast pocket where it had been for the past several weeks. He had taken it out once or twice to look at it while running searches. He had kept it because he was not entirely sure why he had kept it. It was something to look at while he worked, a reminder of what the file record corresponded to, a reason. Good morning, Wren said, without looking up from her calculation. Good morning, he said. She worked, he sat. Did you eat? He asked. Yes. She corrected something on the writing surface. Veth made the pressed grain again. It is not very good, but it is food. I'll bring the crackers next time. You always bring the crackers. Is that a complaint? No. She looked up at him briefly with an expression he had learned to read as the Veth equivalent of affectionate exasperation. It is an observation. He laughed, which was a thing he did more here than anywhere else on the station. He had shifted forward to lean his elbows on the table when the photograph shifted in his pocket. The jacket's unzipped front let it slide slightly, and the edge of the folded paper caught and showed at the top of the pocket. He didn't notice. Wren noticed. She went still in the way she went still when something had her full attention, not the frozen stillness of fear, but the locked, present stillness of a child whose entire processing had redirected to a single point. She was staring at his chest pocket. What is that? She asked. He looked down, saw the paper edge, reached in and pulled it out. He had been going to put it away, but some instinct stopped him and he unfolded it instead, laying it flat on the table. A photograph I printed, he said. From your memory tile, the night I recovered the images. I've had it with me while I was doing the search work. I should have shown it to you sooner. I kept it as a reference while I was. Wren had reached across the table. She took the photograph from under his hands with both of hers, very carefully, like it might break. She looked at it. She did not say anything for a long time. Caleb watched her face. Something was happening in it that he couldn't entirely parse, a movement through several expressions so quickly that he only caught the edges of them. Then she looked up at him, and her dark gold eyes were very bright, and she said in Veth first, and then in standard because she understood that he needed the standard softly, barely above the ambient sound of the shelter. "That's my mom." She said it like a confirmation, like she had been holding a question for a very long time, and this was the answer. She said it like someone touching something they hadn't been allowed to touch. Caleb couldn't move. He was aware of this later, and aware that what happened to him in that moment was something he would never be able to adequately describe. It was not simple emotion, though there was emotion in it. It was more like a complete stop, a full system halt, the feeling of having the ground you were standing on shift into a different category of ground without any warning. He had known the photograph was her mother. He had been looking at this photograph for weeks. He had known it in the abstract, factual way you know things when you are in logistics and search mode, which is a mode that is very good at holding information and very careful about not feeling it, until there is something concrete to attach the feeling to. And here was the concrete thing. Here was Ren, holding the photograph of her mother in both hands, and saying that's my mom with the absolute specificity of a child who had been without her for a long time, and was saying it now the way you say something when the weight of it finally has somewhere to land. He sat there. He did not cry. He did not say anything immediately. He sat there in the full system halt and breathed. Ren, after a moment, looked at him over the top of the photograph with an expression that was, he would have sworn, concern. "Caleb," she said. "I know," he said. "I know it's her." "You had her picture," Ren said, "the whole time." "Yes," he found his voice somewhere. "I found her in the transit records. I've been looking for her. I wanted to find her before he stopped. I didn't want to tell you I was looking until I had something real to give you." Ren lowered the photograph to the table. She looked at it. She put her hands flat on the table on either side of it like she was framing it. "What did you find?" she asked. "Not enough yet," he said, "but more than nothing. She came through this station 14 months ago. She was going toward the secondary contact point you mentioned, the direction you were going from. She was looking for you." Ren was quiet for a long moment. She was looking at the photograph. "She is still looking," Ren said. It was the same present tense he'd noticed before, the deliberate, maintained present tense. He understood now that it was not denial. It was decision. This was a child who had decided that present tense was how she was going to hold her mother until she had proof of the alternative. And she had made that decision clearly and early and stuck to it. And it was possibly the most precise act of will he had ever seen in someone her age or any age. "I think so too," he said. He put his hands on the table beside hers, not on top of them, not touching, just present, an echo of her posture. He looked at the photograph with her. "I'm going to keep looking," he said. "I want you to know that. I'm going to keep looking until I find her or I find something definitive." Ren looked at the photograph for a while longer, then she looked at him. "Why?" she asked. Not combatively. The straightforward question of a child who had learned that adults did not always do things without reason, and who wanted to understand the reason. Caleb thought about it. He thought about the filing cabinet of searches he had open on his workstation. He thought about the photograph he had been carrying in his pocket for weeks without entirely knowing why. "Because you're here," he said, "and she's looking, and the gap between where you both are is information that someone has to organize, and I'm good at organizing information." Ren thought about this. "You are," she confirmed seriously. "Also," he said, "because you're Ren and she's your mother." The child looked at the photograph again. She picked it up carefully, as she had before, and folded it exactly the way it had been folded in his pocket. She held it out to him. He looked at her. "Keep looking," she said. "Keep it while you look." He took it back. He put it in his pocket. He found her 11 days later. It came out of the Veth Community Liaison's office, who had finally heard back from a contact in the Northern Transit Corridor, a Veth-operated aid organization that was doing family reunification work in the post-war zone, and that had an active search record filed under the name Sorvin Ale Myron. The record had been filed 8 months ago and was still open. She had been filing updates to it every 30 days, the most recent one 3 weeks past. The filing was thorough. It included physical description, the names of the vessels Wren might have been traveling on, the secondary contact point coordinates, and a notes field that had been updated at each 30-day interval with the same brief entry every time, a date, a status notation, and then a short line that the translation rendered as asterisk still looking, signal relay open. 8 months of that, every 30 days. Caleb had read it 3 times and then closed the file. The liaison gave him a contact signal and said, without inflection, "This is good news. Don't let it not be good news by how you deliver it." "I won't," he said. She looked at him over her desk with the particular expression of someone who had seen humans handle these moments in a full range of ways, some of them not useful. "She is Verath," the liaison said. "When you tell Wren, use plain language. Don't frame it as hope. She already has hope. She has been managing it for weeks. Give her facts." "I know," he said. "She's been teaching me." The liaison looked at him differently after that. "Good," she said. "Then you'll be fine." He thanked her and walked out of the office and stood in the corridor for a moment, which was not a thing he usually did, and then he walked to the shelter. He found Wren at the communal table again, but this time she was not alone. She was in the middle of some elaborate negotiation with 3 of the Keth siblings, involving the folding game he'd never understood, and she was apparently winning, because the Keth children had the expressions of people who had underestimated someone and were beginning to realize it. Caleb stood in the entrance for a moment, watching her. She looked up and saw him, and whatever she read in his face made her set down the piece she was holding. She excused herself from the game in Keth, which she had apparently learned enough of to manage it, and came to where he was standing. She looked at him, he looked at her. "You found something," she said. "I found her." Wren went very still. "She's alive," Caleb said. "She's been filing search updates for you for the past 8 months. She's currently aboard a vessel operating in the Northern Transit Corridor with a Veth aid organization. The organization has a signal relay. We can reach her today if you want." Wren stood there. He had half expected, he wasn't sure what he'd expected. Tears, maybe, or a sound, or some visible collapse of the structure she'd been holding. What he got instead was that Wren looked at him with her dark gold eyes and breathed in, once, very slowly, and he watched something move through her face that he didn't have a name for, too large, too quiet, too entirely her own for him to put a word on. Then she said in Verath, something his earpiece translated as, "I knew." Not "I hoped." Not "I thought I knew." She said it to herself, not to him, and he understood it was not something she needed him to respond to. So he didn't. After a moment, she reached out and put her hand on his jacket, over the pocket where the photograph was. Just for a second. Just the light pressure of a small 4-fingered hand. Then she stepped back and straightened up and said in standard, "Let's go. Tell me where we go." The signal relay contact was arranged through the Veth Community Liaison's office, which had a better communications setup than the transit authority's general terminals. They went there, Wren walking beside Caleb with the measured pace of someone who was not going to run, who had decided that the appropriate thing was to walk. And the liaison set up the connection and then stepped out of the room, because some contacts were not things for extra people, and she was good at knowing which. Caleb stepped back toward the door. He was going to step out too. "Stay," Wren said, without looking at him. He stayed. The connection resolved slowly. The northern transit corridor was far enough out that signal delay was a real factor, and there was a quality correction pass that took a few seconds, and then the display settled into an image that was not clear, that had the slight lag and flicker of distance, but was legible. The woman from the photograph. Not posing, not aware of the recording surface. Then becoming aware, the slight shift when someone realizes the signal has connected and looking into it. Looking at Ren. She was on a ship. From the look of the background, functional gray bulkhead, the edge of equipment racking just visible at the corner of the frame. She was wearing the clothes of someone who had been doing difficult work for a long time and had long since stopped worrying about what she looked like while doing it. She looked thinner than the photographs, and there were specific shadows under her eyes that didn't have anything to do with lighting, and she was, in the half-second before she understood that the signal had connected and her face reorganized itself. She was visibly and precisely tired. And then she understood the signal had connected, and she saw Ren, and she stopped being tired. It was not that her expression changed. It was that something underneath the expression changed, like the difference between a load-bearing wall and a load-bearing wall with the load removed. She was still herself. She was fully herself. But she was herself without the thing she had been carrying for 8 months, and the absence of it was visible even through a lagging signal from a corridor in the northern transit zone. Whatever she said in Veth, Caleb's earpiece didn't catch it. The transliteration came through as fragments, *child, safe, found, and then dropped out entirely, which was fine, because this was not a conversation he needed to understand. He stood by the door and looked at the middle distance, the near wall, the edge of the display, nothing, and he let the room be theirs. He heard Ren's voice, low and steady, and then her mother's voice from the display. And there was a moment of overlap where both of them were speaking at once and then both stopped, and the silence stretched out for a beat. And then Ren laughed, a sound he had not heard from her before, something short and disbelieving and full. And her mother's voice came through the display with a quality that needed no translation. Caleb kept his eyes on the wall. His jaw ached a little. He unclenched it. After a while, Ren called him over. He came and stood slightly to the side of the display, visible but not central, and Ren's mother looked at him and said something in Veth that his earpiece rendered as, "You are the one who found the images in the tile." "Yes," he said. "I had given up hope for those images," she said. "The tile was broken for 2 years." "The storage substrate was intact," he said. "It was fixable." She looked at him for a moment, the large dark eyes, the same face as Ren's in the same structural way, and said something the earpiece didn't fully catch. He got human and careful and possibly persistent, though that last one might have been a translation approximation. Ren beside him said quietly, "She says you are the careful kind of human." "Is that good?" he asked. "In Veth, yes," Ren said, "very." He nodded and stepped back out of the frame and let them finish their conversation while he looked at the ordinary wall of the liaison's office and breathed. The reunion took 16 days to coordinate. The aid vessel Ren's mother was traveling with was willing to divert to a Veth Station docking approach, but the northern transit corridor was a long way, and the routing needed to be arranged through 3 separate zone authorities. Caleb handled most of it. It was logistics work, which he was good at, and which gave him something to do with the 16 days that was more useful than waiting. 2 days in, he received a message through the liaison's relay from Ren's mother. Not a call, a text-formatted message, because the signal quality at that range was better for text. It was in Veth, and the liaison translated it for him. It said, "The child is really safe, not harmed. I need to know this exactly." He wrote back through the relay in plain terms. He described the shelter, the other children, Areth, the crackers, the Keth siblings, and the calculation writing surface, and the corner behind the third sleeping partition where she had initially installed herself. He described the memory tile and the 43 images. He described, because he thought she would want to know, that her daughter had been careful with her food rations in the life pod and had known to lock the hatch from inside. The reply came 6 hours later. It said, "She remembered everything I told her. I taught her all of it hoping she would never need it." He wrote, "She needed it and she used it correctly." A pause. "Then, tell her I said that, not that I was afraid that she did correctly. She will understand the difference." He told Ren the next day, verbatim. Ren received it the way he'd predicted, not with relief exactly, but with the small, precise nod of someone having a data point confirmed. "I knew she would say that," Ren said. "That is how she says she was afraid." "I know," Caleb said. "I figured that out." Ren looked at him. "You are learning Verath," she said, as if remarking on a mildly surprising but not entirely unexpected development. "A little," he said. "You're a good teacher." She considered this. "I am patient," she allowed. Ren was different during those 16 days. Not more relaxed. She was not a child who relaxed, exactly, but different in the quality of her attention. She was doing the same things she'd been doing all along, the collection arranging and the calculations and the Keth negotiations, but there was something settled in the way she did them. She was not performing patience anymore. She had something the patience was for. She helped 3 of the other children with their translator calibrations during that period, a thing she'd apparently been doing quietly for a while, but that she now did more openly, with the air of someone who no longer needed to conserve quite so much of herself. She taught Caleb 4 Verath words for which Standard had no equivalent. She explained to him, in careful detail, the mathematical notation she used for her calculations, and he spent an evening attempting to work through a simple problem in it, and got it entirely wrong in a way that she found genuinely funny. "Your spatial mapping is backwards," she told him. "I know, I looked at it wrong." "You looked at it like a human," she said. "Humans map left to right. We map," she gestured. "The shape of the thing, not the direction of the thing." "Show me again." She showed him again. He got it wrong again. She did not appear frustrated by this. She appeared to find it instructive, in the way someone finds it instructive to discover that a system they thought was universal is actually particular. "It is interesting," she said, "that you are good at finding things when your spatial mapping works like that." "I use the machine for the spatial part," he said. "I'm good at the pattern part." She nodded slowly. "Yes," she said, "that is what you are good at." On the morning of the 16th day, Caleb came to the shelter at 600, which was earlier than his usual time. Arith was already there. She handed him a cup of Terran coffee from the machine she kept for herself, and did not explain why she had anticipated him. Ren came out of the sleeping partitions at 6:30, saw him, and sat down beside him without preamble. They waited. The vessel docked at 8:50. The Verath community liaison brought the word. Caleb walked with Ren to the docking ring. Arith came too, which was unusual for her, and which he understood to be her own form of ceremony. The docking ring had the particular atmosphere of a place that served significant moments on a daily basis, and had become professionally neutral about it. The technicians at the collar station ran the seal check with the same faces they used for cargo transfers. The overhead lighting was the same flat functional white it always was. The ventilation hum was the same. None of it acknowledged that it was the site of anything other than the ordinary transit work of an ordinary junction station. Ren stood beside him and watched the seal light cycle through its sequence. Amber, amber, green. She was very still. Not the assessment stillness of the first day, something else. He had learned enough of her vocabulary of stillness by now to read it accurately. This was the stillness of someone who has arrived at the end of a distance. They have been traveling for so long that the arrival does not entirely feel real yet, and who is holding themselves steady through the last moment before it becomes real. The access hatch unsealed. The woman from the photograph came through the hatch. She was real in a way photographs were not. She was taller than Caleb had calibrated for a Veth adult, which put her at nearly his height, and she was thinner than the photographs, and she moved with the specific controlled urgency of someone who has been very carefully not running for a long time, and has now arrived at the place where not running is no longer required. She saw Ren. She stopped too, for just a half step, the mirror of Ren's stillness, the same genetic quality of composure confronting the same overwhelming thing, and then she was moving again. Ren took 3 steps toward her mother and this was the thing, she stopped. Just for a second, just a breath's worth, like she was making herself real to herself before she went forward. Then she went forward. Caleb looked at the ceiling. It was a corridor ceiling on Veth Station's docking ring, riveted paneling and overhead conduit, extremely ordinary, and he looked at it for a while and then looked at the floor and then at the wall, and his jaw ached again, and he let it. Veth beside him said nothing. She was looking at the floor too. After a time, he became aware that Veth had put her hand briefly on his arm. The Saurilan gesture he'd learned meant something like asterisk well done or maybe just asterisk yes, and then taken it away. 16 years I've been doing this, she said, to no one in particular. Does it get easier? He asked. She thought about it with the same seriousness Ren brought to questions that deserved it. No, she said, but you get better at standing there. He nodded. You're better at it than most humans, she said. Most humans have to do something. I don't know what to do, he said. I just know how to sit. Yes, Veth said, that's what I mean. After a time, he heard footsteps and he looked up. Ren's mother was standing in front of him. She had Ren's hand in one of hers, and Ren was standing at her side with the look of someone who has found the fixed point they were orienting around, and is no longer necessary to discuss the matter of orientation. The woman looked at Caleb. She said something in Veth, his earpiece caught search, station, records, and then in standard, "You are the one who found her." "I work at the Transit Authority," he said. "I help look for people sometimes." She looked at him with the large dark eyes that were the same as Ren's, and said something that his earpiece rendered as, "There is no word in standard for what I owe you." "You don't owe me anything," he said. She looked at him with the polite but firm expression of someone who had decided to completely disregard what he just said. Ren from her mother's side said, "She means it," and then to her mother in standard, "He says that, but he is wrong." Caleb looked at Ren. Ren looked back at him with the same affectionate exasperation she'd had for most of the past several weeks. "She's right, you know," Veth said from behind him. He thought about the photograph in his pocket. He thought about 43 images recovered from a cracked memory tile. He thought about the moment when a child had reached across a table and said, "That's my mom," with her whole self organized around those 3 words, and the way the ground had shifted under him and hadn't entirely shifted back. "All right," he said, "you're both right." Ren made a small, precise nod that was very like her mother's. Her mother looked between the two of them with something in her expression that he thought was the beginning of understanding how they had spent these weeks, the specific shorthand that develops between people who have been waiting together, and her expression did something complex and quiet. She put her hand out to him in the human gesture. She knew it, which meant she had encountered humans before, which meant things about her that he filed away and might ask about someday when there was time. He shook it. "Thank you," she said in standard. "Safe travels," he said. They left the following morning. The Veth Aid Organization had a connection at a station farther up the corridor, and from there, a route back to Veth space where Ren's mother had family who had been looking for both of them. The liaison's office had handled the documentation, which was extensive and took most of the previous afternoon to process. Caleb had stayed late and helped. He came to the shelter in the morning not quite knowing why, because there was nothing logistically he needed to do. The documentation was done, the transit was arranged, the docking authorization was filed. He came because it was Tuesday. Wren was in the communal room with her collection of objects arranged in front of her, which were fewer than they had been, some things given away, a few packed, a few left deliberately on the shelter's communal shelf for the next child who needed them. The button was still there, the smooth stones, the repaired memory tile. She looked up when he came in. "You came," she said. "It's Tuesday." She nodded as if this answered something. He sat down across from her collection. He looked at it. "Are you taking the tile?" he asked. "Yes," she picked it up. "The stones are for the shelf. The button, the Keth siblings wanted it back. They were being polite when they traded it." A small pause. "I gave it back." "Good call." "I know." She looked at the tile. "I looked at all the pictures last night. My mother wanted to see which ones had been recovered." A pause. "She cried at some of them." "That seems right," Caleb said. "Yes." Wren set the tile down carefully and looked at him. "I told her about you," she said. "All of it. The crackers and the calculations and the photograph and what you said about the gap being information." "What did she say?" "She said humans were strange." A pause. "She said it the way she says things she means as a compliment." He laughed. Wren reached into the pocket of her outer layer. She had Veth standard traveling clothes on, which he hadn't seen on her before, the garment her mother had brought, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it on the table between them. It was a drawing in the Veth mathematical notation style, but not calculation. The notation arranged into an image, abstract and precise at the same time, the way Veth children sometimes represented things rather than just mapping them. He looked at it for a moment. It was the communal table, the shelter, two figures, one large, one small, sitting across from each other with an object between them. The object, rendered in the spare lines of the notation, was unmistakably the photograph. "This is for you," Wren said. He picked it up. "So you remember," she said, "what it looked like when I found her." He looked at the drawing for a long time. "Wren," he said. "Yes. I'm not going to forget." She looked at him steadily with her dark gold eyes. "I know," she said. "But now you have a picture too." He folded it with care, the way she had folded the photograph, that first time, along its exact original creases. He put it in his breast pocket. She watched him do it. "Take care of yourself," he said. "You also," she said. "Come on Tuesdays and Fridays," she added. "There will be others." "I know," he said. "And bring the crackers." "I always bring the crackers." "Yes," she said with great precision. "That is why you are good at this." She picked up the tile and her few remaining things and stood, and he stood too, and she looked at him one more time with the same steadiness she'd had from the beginning, the enormous quiet composure of a child who had decided how she was going to hold things and had held them exactly that way. And then she went toward the door where her mother was waiting. At the threshold, she stopped and turned back. "Caleb," she said. "Yes." "The next step is always findable," she said. "My mother says so, I believe her." He looked at her, small and silver-haired and perfectly composed. 5 steps from the door and 1 step from her mother and the whole rest of her life, holding the memory tile in both hands. "So do I," he said. She turned and went through the door. He stood in the empty shelter in the misting atmospheric cycle, with the drawing in his pocket and the crackers still in his satchel, and he stood there for a moment. Then he sat back down at the communal table, opened the crackers, put them in the middle of the table, and waited for whoever came in next. End of story.